Welcome in everyone to Flyover Footy. My name is Matt Baker. I am joined by a very special guest on this week's Flyover Footy to preview the Columbus Crew from MLS Season Pass. He's a writer for MLSsoccer.com, a former host of Extratime Radio, current host of Instant Replay. He's been with Season Pass, I believe, since its inception on shows like MLS 360, Countdown, Wrap Up. Currently, he's the sideline reporter. You'll be hearing and seeing from him as the man on the ground for Sunday Night Soccer this week in St. Louis. Andrew Wiebe joins me on Flyover Footy. Andrew, thank you so much for joining.
Matt, I appreciate being on the show. It is both humbling and intimidating to hear that list of things that I both do and don't do these days. I think it hurts to hear the things I don't do, but it is so fun to be back in front of the microphone in my podcast setup, which I so rarely go down and use anymore. RIP Extra Time. May it live forever. May it live again, perhaps. We shall see about that. But I'm having so much fun on Sunday Night Soccer this year. And just getting around to the league. I think one of the things that you miss when you're stuck in a studio or in your basement recording podcasts is the soul of the game. And for me, the soul of the game is in stadium. It's with supporters. It's in the environment around the people for whom this all matter the most. And so as a tried and true Midwesterner, not a Missourian, though I guess I did live in Missouri for 2 years, just barely, just over the state line in Kansas City. But a tried and true Midwesterner, I am looking forward to being in St. Louis and I think experiencing City Park for the very first time in a game environment. I've been there for super drafts and expansion drafts. I have not actually experienced it rocking yet.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. You've been to City Park, now Energizer Park, so you've got to get that right for the broadcast.
Excuse me. Good point. Yes.
This is the dress rehearsal for that. But you are there for the expansion draft. You're there for the super draft. That's where you and I met for the first time. And it's exciting to have you come in for a game atmosphere. But let's take a step back because I'm sure our listeners know who you are. But on the off chance that they don't, give us the spark notes or the cliff notes of your journey. You're a Kansas City native, as you mentioned. You've moved to NYC. I think there was a there and back again situation. So what brought you to covering MLS?
I'll give you the cliff notes. I will say before I start that, just to maybe put a bow on our first time meeting, Matt had been one of those, and I'll do third person here just because I'm talking to the audience, I guess. One of those people, when you first start trying to understand what a club is about, what a team is about, what a city is about, you were one of the first people I found on Twitter. And I'm obviously very active there because it really gives me an ability to have tentacles everywhere. And I was like, oh, this guy, one, is passionate, two, knows his stuff, and three, his DMs are open. And I started bothering you all the time for information, just so people know that Matt has been a source of information for me for a long time. And that probably takes me back to my starting point with soccer and with Major League Soccer. I was a college freshman in 2006, and anybody who's a soccer fan hears any given year and knows exactly what may have happened in that year. And it was a World Cup in Germany, and I had played soccer till I was maybe a eighth grader, but was a baseball player. And I just got obsessed. Like the games were at a perfect time for me to watch after I woke up. Every single morning, I watched basically every single game from that 06 World Cup. And I was a business major, and I thought I don't want to be a business major anymore. First of all, that had nothing to do with soccer, but it helped that I decided journalism was where I wanted to go. And so getting obsessed with that tournament started me down the rabbit hole of just like, what is this club? What is this country's national team about? What is the soccer culture in any given place around the world? Who are these players? How did they make it to where they got? And I got really obsessed with that as I was getting obsessed with journalism. And I pitched to my school paper at the University of Kansas. Yeah. Woo, go Jayhawks. Just so everybody at home can feel that. That I should write a column every week about Major League Soccer. And, a college newspaper in the mid-2000s is the perfect place to pitch something so crazy because why not? They're just trying to fill the pages. And I did that and started covering then the Kansas City Wizards on my own blog. So I couldn't get an internship. And then had a entry-level job out of college after doing journalism and got a call one day to be the first beat reporter for MLSsoccer.com and the graduation point from MLS Net for then the Kansas City Wizards, which became Sporting Kansas City. And I was there for the big rise of the Man U friendly and the stadium being built and the rebranding and the improvement of that club across the board, whether it be in terms of cultural relevance in Kansas City or just quality on the field. And that got me to New York City. And I was a low man on the totem pole for a long time, new media editor, doing a lot of writing, a lot of editing. I did that for a long time, worked my way into being on Extra Time with the incredible and venerable Sinerman Borg and Nick Fershaw, and then became the host when Nick Fershaw left and then took over the full podcast. And that was one of the joys of my life. And that's where a lot of people in MLS know me from. And then, over the course of that time, just started doing a bunch of content on video, whether it be silly stuff about MLS fantasy that only the true OGs know and remember. And then into, studio shows and it seems like everything under the sun. So I've put about 15 years into covering, into loving, into being obsessed with the growth of this league and the everyday happenings of this league. And I am as passionate now as I was back then, just a little more tired because I have 2 children under the age of 8. So it's been an incredible, crazy, unpredictable, never would have thought it would happen to me journey. And I'm just happy to be here.
I don't think there's a better ambassador for maybe not even soccer, but just MLS, especially that we could have on to talk about it. And I wish we could have you on to talk about MLS in general, but we're here to talk about the Crew. We will get to the Crew. We will get to St. Louis City, your opinions on both. But I wanted to, because we have you on here and you're plugged in, you've got the fingers on the pulse of the entire league week in and week out. We are actually, by my math, about 20% of the way through the 2025 MLS season.
That's wild.
Isn't it? It is absolutely insane how fast things are flying, but kind of a nice opportunity. Let our fans know what are some of the big storylines that are going on in the league so far. What has you most excited to be following across the league?
I mean, the most unpredictable, incredible, only in MLS storyline is the Vancouver Whitecaps. And maybe that's, those of us who have covered this league since the Whitecaps arrived have just I've gotten to know this team as sometimes a semi-bright bulb, but mostly not, and almost never in situations of true consequence. When push comes to shove for the Vancouver Whitecaps, they have mostly been shoved out of the spotlight. And it's just so incredible to look at the standings, and there they are, number 1 in the West. Oh, and there they are, top of the Supporters Shield. Oh, and there they are in Mexico against Monterrey and Pumas, away on the road in Mexico after not getting a result at home, finding a way through via away goals. Oh, there they are in the CONCACAF Champions Cup semifinals against Inter Miami and Lionel Messi. And it's not with star power necessarily. I mean, Ryan Gauld has been hurt for most of the season. It's not with this huge spend, which we associate with Miami and an ambition that you can see and feel and, watch go out in the form of money transfers to opposing clubs and players. It's with this long, slow, steady build that is just honestly really incredible. I give Axel Schuster a ton of credit. While we were all complaining about them not reaching their potential and needing to do more, he remained pretty patient. I think he made the right decision in terms of a change of coach, which hurts me to say because I love Vanni Sartini with all of my heart. But the group, it's not necessarily about Sartini being a bad coach, which I'll get to in a second. It's more about Jesper Sorensen being the right coach for the right moment to help elevate the group to a new level. And then it was patience with players. I mean, if you look at the core of the group that went to Monterrey, or the core of the group that tied in the late going against Pumas last night to advance, it's guys they've had for a long time. They've been patient with, that have developed. Ali Ahmed has turned into a really incredible player for them. That center back pairing is now among the best in the league in terms of Tristan Blackman and Veslanovic. Pedro Vite is a guy that on extra time for years and years we were impatient with. We're like, Pedro, you have so much talent. Like, show it, dude. And he's showing it. And then, guys like Sebastian Berhalter. And there are all these sort of small moves that added up over time and time spent together and disappointments had together that have now coalesced into a team that can win in the biggest moments. And, that's incredible. I give Vanni a ton of credit for taking some of the lumps along the way and keeping trust and faith in those players and giving them the opportunities. But, man, Vancouver Whitecaps, 20% of the season, top of the Shield in the CONCACAF Champions Cup semis, and having a decent, maybe not even odds chance, but a close to even odds chance of advancing. That's incredible.
And if you're a St. Louis City fan listening to this, put a pin in these thoughts because we play Vancouver after the Columbus Crew. So Vancouver's coming to Energizer Park. All of this is going to be very relevant to what we're going to be facing. And Vancouver's white hot, top of the table, top of the West. They're just as dangerous as the Columbus Crew, essentially. So we've got back-to-back difficult games ahead of us for City.
Very tough.
Andrew, talk to me about expansion. How is San Diego able to do what they're doing? And is it at all comparable to what St. Louis did a couple of years ago?
That's an interesting, I hadn't really thought about comparing it to St. Louis. That is an obvious comparison. I think the comparison I would make between the two is that there is no uncertainty within that group in terms of who they are, what they're supposed to do, what their roles are, and what sort of the core of their soccer being is, what they want to represent on the field. And that was very apparent to me from the very first minute I talked to Mikey Veras, which was last year, and then at the expansion draft this year, and then once again in preparation for the very first game. I am very impressed with his ability to communicate complex ideas in a very simple way. And that's the only way you're going to get a group of the size and with the lack of familiarity that an expansion team has on the same page as quickly as they have and get results out of it. From that simplicity has come a pretty complex, interesting style of play for them. But I think he made the tenets very easy to understand, and so they could build on those over time. And we're still seeing them build because they haven't had their best player, or who is supposed to be their best player, in Chucky Lozano until recently. So I think that's the similarity I would make. And I think Bradley Carnell was the same way. There was no doubt, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there was no doubt who that St. Louis team was supposed to be, who they wanted to be, and what was expected of them on any given match day. The question is, how long does the element of surprise last?
Yep.
Right. And that was something that St. Louis ran into. And I'm sure it's something that San Diego are going to run into as well. And to give you one last sort of league-wide, we're going to hit them. I was gonna wax poetic on the Columbus Crew, but we'll hit them. No need.
Let's stick to the East for a second. One other team I want your thoughts on, picking up off the Bradley Carnell mention, Philadelphia Union. How has Carnell been able to do this with the Union? Almost replicate the type of success he had in year one with St. Louis with this Philadelphia side after they had such a poor outing for 2024?
It was poor by their standards, is what I would say. And I think the standards in Philly have been so high that I give all the credit to Jim Curtin and, Ernst Tanner as well, and everybody who built those teams over time. So was it a down year? It was, but I think it was a year where you felt like they underperformed. So the expectation was that they should have been better, and that was what the frustration was about. Not that they weren't capable of being better, that they were, and they just didn't get the job done. Bradley very clearly is in that same camp as Mikey Veras and has already shown it, and that when he comes into an organization, into a group, there is a very clear understanding of what he's about, what he wants, and also an energy that I think has been really contagious so far. The other thing I would say is that he seems to have a very good feel for how to not only win the ball in advantageous places, but how to create really good relationships between the players that occupy the space right in front of goal. And if I'm thinking back to 2023 and St. Louis, I'm thinking of guys like Klaus and Gioacchini. By the way, that was probably his best professional season. Sam Adeniran, probably his best professional season. And the way that those guys just sort of understood how to move and how to work together to put opponents under pressure, but to create opportunities for each other. And they didn't have to be super selfish about it. So it doesn't surprise me that off the rip, this Philly team and the forward line just looks in sync. Looks like they understand where to move, how to move, when to move. And it becomes pretty clear, I think, in the way that you play, how to create chances off of that sometimes. So I'm not personally surprised. I think the challenge for Bradley will be once other teams, the West had St. Louis figured out in that sense. The East didn't see him as much. What happens when the East starts seeing that style of play more? What's the next sort of club in the bag? And then what do you do without Daniel Gazdag? Daniel Gazdag, to me, is this incredibly skilled interpreter of space. The issue is when you go into Carnell's system, he doesn't fit in the spaces he wants to be in the most, which is sort of hovering around with partners in behind and around the goal. He's going to be pushed out wide a little bit more. In defensive situations, it's going to be more of a 4-4-2. So I think it's the right move at the right time for Daniel Gazdag as well as the Philadelphia Union. Contract year, move him on, get him to a place in Columbus where to me, watch out. People have joked about him being a PK merchant. Put him in Wilfried's system. The mercantile is about to be thriving, and it ain't going to be from the spot alone.
Yeah, I think from what I saw, the Gazdag signing for the Crew and that cash for trade deal kind of took people by surprise because the Crew were looking for a number 9 in a lot of ways. And so the quality is absolutely there. I think that was a somewhat of a surprise signing, though. if, it's debatable right now whether St. Louis is going to have to face Gazdag. Wouldn't surprise me. He's in form. He's in training, as I understand it, on Thursday.
Yeah.
So he'll probably travel with the team to St. Louis. Andrew, let me take a look at St. Louis and Columbus real quick before I pull you back in to look at the Columbus Crew. For the St. Louis City fans going into this weekend, St. Louis City, we know it's been a bad run of form. 3 straight losses, sitting 11th in the West, 2 wins, 3 losses, 2 draws. We're now down to a 0-goal differential, 4 goals for, 4 goals against. The 3-match losing streak hasn't just been 3 matches lost. It's been 3 matches with no goals. 2-0 last week against SKC that we all want to forget, but we're not going to be able to because we're going to talk about it here in a minute. 1-0 loss at home to Austin, which was another pretty devastating loss given what Austin was coming in with. And then 1-0 loss away at Philadelphia, another really gut punch of a loss. Now, we know the trends for St. Louis. We've got an inability to score going on. We have a big problem in the attack, but we're still defensively sound. Second best goals against in the league. And outside of this SKC match, you can argue that we've had the best defense in the entire league. The big problem we're having for St. Louis again this weekend is going to be injuries. We can already expect to be out for Chris Durkin with an MCL injury, out for Roman Berkey. Thomas Totland is still out. Edu Leuven is, I would say, 90% out. He wasn't at training in the middle of the week, and it's likely he's still going to remain out. Non-injury for Leuven. He's still on family leave, as Olaf Melberg says. Jonas Horn is going to be out with his hamstring as he continues to recover. He was running on his own, at least in training, as was Jay Reed. Jay Reed, who's been out after having foot surgery in January. Boy, could we have been using him at left wing back since this injury to Thomas Totland especially. But Reed has been running on his own a little bit. Even Rasmus Alm has returned to training of sorts. He returned to do some individual drills, has not yet returned to the team. So all of these players are out, but everybody's at least trending in the right direction. We hope to get Berkey back in the next week or two. We hope to get Totland back in the next week or two. Same with Jonas Horn. And then Edu Leuven's a big question. A lot of issues with depth going on with St. Louis. But if we look at the Columbus Crew, first in the East, like Andrew said, 7-4-0. They are undefeated to start the 2025 season, 7 matches in, 3-4-0, sorry, 7 matches, 3-4-0. On a 2-match win streak, they have a 2-1 win at home against Montreal, 2-1 win away at DC, 0-0 draw at home against NYCFC. So they've been cooking. They've had low-scoring affairs, early goal scoring throughout, and it seems like they're not quite suffering from the injuries that St. Louis is, although they have a couple questions going into this weekend. Rudy Camacho, their center back, is going to be out. They've got a couple other depth injuries. Darlington Nagbe may carry a questionable designation this weekend. He was back in training on Wednesday, but Nancy said he was still day-to-day for Sunday. And Diego Rossi may have just been having managed minutes on training this week, but he was training to the side, limited in training on Wednesday. We'll see if he carries any designation going into the weekend, but Columbus's number 10 is going to maybe a player to watch. We'll see. Andrew, let me bring you back in for this one. So where do we really start with this Columbus Crew? Because like I mentioned, first in the East, undefeated as they come into Energizer Park. They're led by the reigning and defending Sigi Schmid MLS Coach of the Year in Wilfried Nancy. Despite having one of the best records, they've lost one of their best players this offseason, Cucho Hernandez. So they're able to have this consistency going from 2024 to 2025, continuing to be a powerhouse. What is it about this Columbus Crew team that makes them so special?
Well, there's a lot of things, but it all comes back to one man, Matt, and it's Wilfried Nancy. Wilfried Nancy, for me, is the most valuable person in Major League Soccer. I say that over Lionel Messi, and I shudder, and I can't believe I'm doing it right now, and it kind of like working through this take on the fly. Because as soon as I said it, I was like, well, I just watched Lionel in person, and I just watched CONCACAF Champions Cup, and that's a tough one. But Lionel has been hurt. He's been unavailable. He's one player. Wilfried Nancy's not going to be hurt. Unless he goes to Europe, which is very possible at some point here, he is there to influence this team every single day in training, every day during matches, every day. Wilfried Nancy is the sort of coach that sees his best player and arguably the league's best player last year in Cucho Hernandez leave and takes that as not only a challenge, but also perhaps in a way, and you might have to twist your mind to get there a little bit, a benefit to the way that he wants to play. This Columbus team, every single match, every single year, every single month under Wilfried has progressed and added different wrinkles to what they do. And when you watch them play, and particularly when you see the way that they rotate, and the player that you could focus on to really understand this most is probably Steven Moreira. You can just see how comfortable all of the players on this team are in recognizing moments, reorienting and organizing themselves, and being willing to embark on journeys into space that might not be traditional for other teams, but feel traditional for the Crew because they're so used to being fluid. There's fluidity and there's freedom within a structure. And Ben Wright, if you don't follow Ben Wright on Twitter, to your audience, the clip he put out this week is really, really instructive and really useful to help understand this concept. How they reshape, how they create space for themselves, how they draw pressure, what they do once they draw pressure, how they get numbers in spots in the box. And so, when you were talking about Daniel Gazdag and their needs in terms of the transfer window, I think it's easy for all of us to get really binary and think in terms of positionality. It's like they need a 9. Like they need but was Cucho a 9? Not really. With Christian Ramirez is with the Galaxy now and was previously, but he didn't really play like it for the Crew, right? He was dropping back into all kinds of crazy positions, and there was all this rotation. And the first rotation you really saw with them was that front 3. So when I think about the Crew, I think about guys popping up in positions you would never expect them. Max Arston all of a sudden behaving almost like a second forward from left wing back. Mo Farsi at right wing back routinely being the furthest player up the field. There's just all these moments where that guy shouldn't be there. And because he shouldn't be there, well, I have to shift now. And now that I shifted, this guy's here. And oh my God, we're overrun. So in terms of taking all of this and putting it, in a present that's, sort of wrapped up here, that's where I think Daniel Gazdag is such a perfect fit for the Columbus Crew. He is not a 9, but he can play like a 9. He is not a 10, but he can play like a 10. Maybe not in the traditional sort of I get on the ball, I'm Carlos Valderrama, or I'm Lucho and I'm string pulling, and more so in the sense of I understand where space is. I understand how to combine and run to create more space. I understand what moment is the right moment to arrive, and then I'm very clean in my technical execution once I do all those things. Boy, this team is it is so satisfying to be able to watch a team in this league play the way the Columbus Crew does. I am routinely in awe of Wilfried Nancy.
I can imagine there are more than a few of our listeners here who are a little bit jealous of hearing you wax poetic about the style of play, watching them, the attractive soccer nature that they play. Now, a lot's been made about Nancy ball. That's the term. But tell us what Nancy ball is. Is it the ability for players to have that freedom to take space as they see it, and then everybody else kind of just knows their responsibility and kind of falls into place around them, and it disrupts so effectively the defense? Or is there more nuance to it?
There's a ton of nuance in any given moment, but a lot of it is up for interpretation within the structure that Wilfried is giving his team. Mm-hmm. So the way I would describe it most is that the Crew are going to use the ball to pull you into positions that unbalance you. And once they have you unbalanced, their confidence on that's often going to be what you might characterize as a chance to, if you're the opponent, you're like, oh, we got him. This is a place where teams might boot it forward. We'll go win a second ball and go the other way. This is a team where a place where on other teams we would win the ball and have a counterattacking opportunity or a transition opportunity. The Crew want you to believe that you have that opportunity because that forces you to send players forward. That forces you to take chances. And the moment that you take a chance on the Crew is the moment they play those 2-3 little intricate balls, and then they're off to the races. And that's sort of the misconception with the Crew and with their style of play sometimes is, people get stuck in that idea of tiki-taka, where it's short passes all the way up the field. With tiki-taka and with the way Nancy plays, it's short passes to create moments to go quickly and moments to get defenders backpedaling. And so the Crew want to attract your pressure with 3 in the back and then 2 midfielders in front. They want to get you. They want to get playing in those combinations. They want to pull you from side to side or into a little dark alley. And then once you find yourself there and look around, bam, they've combined, played through you, found a man on the run, and now they have runners streaming forward. And you're going to see 5 guys, more often than not, be that forward line. 2 wide, usually the wing backs, and then that front 3 that they're running with. And hell, sometimes Steven Moreira is going to pop up there, or Malte Admonson as well. This is the challenge. But it's all about attracting pressure to create space and then attacking that space at speed. So it's organized, but there's freedom to express yourself within this very set organization from Wilfried Nancy. Even the rotations are organized. Even the fact that Steven Moreira is popping up on other places is organized.
And honestly, I got to give props going back to a segment ago. Ben Wright, if you haven't saw that video and that analysis on the Steven Moreira play and how he's able to progress and kind of take space as he needs it, all the way from the right wing back side, right center back side, all the way to the left attacking area. I mean, it's just beautiful to watch.
And then dropped into number 10 and the way his teammates react around him. We can talk about this.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing to me, though.
Seeing it is a whole different experience.
And watching how his teammates react to that. It's everybody working in cohesion, working as one, knowing the responsibilities when the ball's in any given space of the field, no matter who has it. That's been the most impressive thing to me. But all of this exciting ball progression, all of the exciting movement and fluidity, the Crew haven't been a goal scoring fiend this year, though. They had that 4-goal outburst to start the season against the Chicago Fire, but the goals have not been flowing. So is this an issue with finishing? Is this teams being more defensively sound in the box? Or is it just bad luck by the Crew?
I think there's a little bit of bad luck. I think ultimately they know they need more quality. And that's where the Gazdag side comes from as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's more quality. It's more depth in the front three. It's more options. I look at their roster and I don't see really any issues in midfield. And I mean by that I mean the holding two that they play with. I don't really see any issues on the back line. They're incredibly deep at wing back, which is like a critical spot for them, and have a good group of center backs. At this point, I think it's just about providing more options in that front three, because those ultimately are going to be the guys that get the vast majority of goals for you. But Wilfried's not. If you go look at the squads Wilfried has and you compare them to the rest of the league, you are going to see very quickly, just on counting, that they have less players. They have less senior players. They have less players overall in the squad. Wilfried likes to have a small squad, but they needed quality to come in. So there you have Gazdag, who's coming in. He should be, in my opinion, again, a perfect match. And then you have an opportunity to go add a couple more players because of the way they've structured their squad. They're right now in the 3+3 model. Darlington Nagbe is occupying a designated player spot, but he's purely a placeholder in that sense. In the sense that, hey, from a cap perspective, we can use him here, and that's beneficial for now. But if we got somebody else, we could push them in. And that's why you go 3+3 before the window even closes when you just have one senior DP, because there's a possibility we could have two. Gazdag, I think, will sign a new contract probably, and then he'll become a senior DP. And I wouldn't put it past him in the summer to go get another one. This even if they don't, they're still going to be one of the best teams in the league. And the other reason I think that is it's not just about goals with the Crew. It's easy to fall in love with that because Cucho has been just absolutely sumptuous since his time in MLS and style of play. They punch you in the face. When they go downhill at you and you win the ball, they're in perfect position to punch you in the mouth repeatedly to win the ball back. They are one of the best counter-pressing teams in the league, no doubt, by far. And we were talking to Wilfried yesterday, and I just asked him, what's the biggest progression within your team? What do you like the most? And the last couple of years when I've talked to him, he's always used the phrase, we want to be disgusting to play against. And he said, we're disgusting to play against this year. We've reached the point as a group collectively where we are just so hard to play against, and we put teams under so much pressure that's what I'm the most proud of right now. And in some ways, that's what I mean when you say not addition by subtraction, but potentially benefits by Cucho not being there. You don't have that insane game changer, but Cucho wasn't the defensive presence that I think Wilfried would prefer. Diego Rossi is. Daniel Gazdag is. Watch out. All I'm saying is watch out when you think you won the ball off them in your own third.
So that might answer my next question. It's looking at the defensive side of the Crew. So St. Louis, if there's one thing that we have, and we'll talk about it in a second, to hang our hat on, it's the defensive side of the ball. But the Crew in MLS play have not allowed more than one goal against in any single game since that first game against Chicago. So is it the counter pressing? Is it the bravery aspect that's really reinforcing their defensive structure, or is there more to it?
It's the possession. It starts with the possession. If the other team doesn't have the ball, what are they going to do? And then that possession puts them in good pressing positions because they lose the ball in the areas that they want to lose it in. Now, I think you're going to see St. Louis in a lot of situations hitting it long because they're going to have to. They're going to be in a situation where trying to sustain pressure and trying to sustain possession against the Crew is just, it's not going to be there for them. There's going to be too many numbers around the ball, not enough movement for St. Louis. So I think you're going to see a lot of just long balls go back the other way. And that's really the core of it. Like, they just limit chances because you don't have the ball enough. And when you do, they're in good positions to not only defend, but to defend aggressively. And that's a really tough combo.
Yeah, that's one thing St. Louis has struggled with as well, is playing the ball out of the back, trying to get the ball out of their defensive half into meaningful positions. But really quick, before we transition over to St. Louis, you've mentioned a handful of them already, but key difference makers for this Crew team that we should watch out for from the St. Louis side. And I'm curious, not just on these couple players, but is there a youth revolution going on with the Columbus Crew? Because we're talking guys like Jason Russell-Rowe and our old friend AZ Jackson having some meaningful roles on the Columbus Crew this year. Plus, our friend Patrick Schulte, goalkeeper, St. Louis University alumni, U.S. national team keeper. Got a lot of familiarity with him, but who are some of these big players to watch out for from the Crew?
Well, I'm going to start you with Jason Russell-Rowe, and he's such an interesting example of the way the Crew go about player development and then competition within the squad. Because if you think back to last year, Jason Russell-Rowe was a starter to start the year. 11 of his 14 starts on the year came in March, April, and May.
Yep.
And then Christian Ramirez won the spot, and the chemistry was just so perfect with him and Rossi and Cucho that you couldn't take him out. But Jason Russell-Rowe, his ceiling is extremely high. His physical gifts are there, both in terms of hold-up play if he's engaged in that sense, but certainly we've seen as a finisher. It's just a question of consistency. So he's going to be a really difficult player to deal with. And I think he's a player that might be poised for one of those seasons where you're like, like a kind of a Pat Ajiman season from last year, where it's like, oh, okay, this guy's ceiling is so much higher than we previously had thought. So watch out for him. Watch out for the physical presence, but in particular, look at his technique when he finishes. He's really underrated in that sense, and I'll have a good story for everybody on the Sunday Night Soccer broadcast that I can't give away just yet, but a little tease for you there.
Good tease.
AZ is also just a perfect project player for this Crew because Wilfried's not looking for a prototype. He's not like, oh, I want a number 9 and I want the prototypical number 9. I want a number 10. He's like, I want an attacker who can do all manner of different things. And AZ was in a position where he needed an opportunity and had all those physical gifts and technical gifts.
Yeah. And
we're starting to see some of them trickle out from time to time. His ability in space, his ability to attack at speed, his ability to be really technically sound in spaces and speeds that are not usually common. So watch out for him. I'm very curious. Like, I think Rossi will start. I think Jason Russell-Rowe will start. He started every game in the league so far for the Crew. That third spot up top is the spot that I'm curious about. I wonder if Daniel Gazdag will get that opportunity, or if Wilfried will say, you know what, you're brand new into the team. Yes, you're a designated player. Yes, you're one of the best attacking players in this league over the last 3-4 seasons. But we've got a group, we've got cohesion, we've got sort of a hierarchy here. People have earned their spots over the course of preseason and the start. AZ gets that start. I'm curious to see where that goes. And there's a question mark in the two. Like, is it going to be Nagbe or Shambost? I think Zawadzki will stay there regardless. But it's those front three, and then I'm telling you, watch out for the wingbacks. Mo Farsi and Max Arfston are the guys who have won that job, and they're goal dangerous, and they're able to create chances. They're really good 1v1, and that's where a lot of that press comes from, because the fullbacks get so high that they're in positions when you try to outlet to your wingbacks. In the case of St. Louis, or you have those center backs that kind of spin out wide in possession, they're going to go face to face with two guys that are going to have the advantage from a quickness perspective and an athleticism perspective. And
for St. Louis side, who is missing one of our absolute top wingbacks in Thomas Totland, that sounds like it could be a tall task for if recent history indicates anything, Kyle Hebert to work through. So that's going to be
that's why I'm saying those long balls might be coming, because you might have to just get rid of it.
All right, so let's pivot to St. Louis now. Let's talk about, what is St. Louis to a guy like you? You follow the league, you watch match after match. Describe what comes to mind when you think of this 2025 St. Louis City team, on or off the field, and what you're expecting this weekend.
One word: searching. Searching for who they are, searching for options in possession, searching for someone who can make special plays, searching for space and numbers high up the pitch, just sort of searching for what their well-rounded identity should be. Because right now, the identity to me is like, it's half of the yin and yang. The defensive identity, at least for the time being, is there.
Yeah.
And it's working. Like, they're hard to break down. They've got numbers in and around the front of the 18 in all the most dangerous areas, and they're forcing you into wide spots. It's mostly working. But within that yin, there's not a lot of yang. Like, there's just, when I watched this Kansas City game, and I watched most of it this morning just to refresh my memory before I jumped on with you, it's just ponderous. It's slow. There's not numbers around the ball when they're in possession. And because there aren't numbers, you can't combine to break pressure and then switch and move and shift opposing defenses one way or the other to create space and opportunity and time for yourself. And that's where the pattern starts to emerge, particularly when St. Louis are trying to build out of the back and the other team is not pushed up. Pass, pause, pass, pause, predictable pass, pressure, ball back, ball kicked forward, second ball into João Klaus. Can he hold it? Can you win the second ball? Didn't win nearly enough of them against Kansas City, and then flip. Now you're back the other way, and now you're 5-4-1 deep in your own box. And you're 5-4-1 deep in your own box with no path out because you can't possess the ball. So then it's just high over the top, and then you just got to get fortunate at times. You got to get fortunate that circumstances give you numbers. For instance, I think was it Wallum that had the ball off the post in the first half?
Yeah.
He was everywhere, by the way. I mean, that guy's got a freaking engine. But the only reason that chance happens is because one of the only times in the first half they tried to push numbers forward, and he was forward already. And they were recovering, and Kansas City was possessing. When you win the ball from behind in an unpredictable spot, because mostly St. Louis is winning the ball in predictable areas for the other team, you win the ball in an unpredictable spot, you can play forward because Kansas City is unbalanced. And then all of a sudden, it's 2v2. There's combination play. You can get to goal. But those moments where Kansas City are unbalanced were so few and far in between because, one, St. Louis can't move forward quick enough. And two, they're playing from deep and they're playing super predictably all the time. I'm waiting to see whether or not it's personnel, whether it's, preferred style of play, whether it's just lack of chemistry and cohesion or understanding the way Olaf wants to build. I'm waiting to see another. They're searching for that evolution, right? They're searching.
And maybe it's the fact that I really respect the things you have to say. Maybe it's the fact that we just talked about the Columbus Crew and you wax poetic about them, but it feels like you're yelling at me about St. Louis and how
I shouldn't.
And how
terrible of me.
But that is exactly what we all feel as the St. Louis City fan base. And that I feel you're getting to the point where everybody is frustrated through 7 games because it doesn't feel like there is a clear identity. It doesn't feel like there's a clear, they're doing this really well. They just need to improve on this as far as goal scoring goes. So my question to you is, as someone who's followed the league for so long, you talked through your resume earlier on. Does it surprise you to see the turnover and change from the St. Louis City team between years 1 and 3? Because it's not just the players, but it's the overall system it feels like. And that's somewhat surprising to myself in particular, as well as the fans, because I heard Lutz Pfannenstiel, sporting director, who has remained our sporting director for the life of our team, say this preseason that he wants this to be the style 2.0, City 2.0, where you're doing the things you had been doing, you're high pressing, you're winning the ball high, you're having this intensity, and you're shoring up the things that need shored up. But it feels like this is more of a reset. How do you see this change between St. Louis in these couple of years?
Well, I don't see high pressing happening. I see, to me, just watching them, there's a pretty big gap in between what they were under Bradley Carnell, which I think is way over on the, that's way over on the sort of the bandwidth of who you're going to be in terms of pressing. And if that was really the vision, well, I don't know that you were going to go find another coach that necessarily interprets or plays or wants to play under that vision in the same way that Bradley was. So there was naturally going to be a softening of that in some way when you went to Olaf. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm trying to think through previous expansion teams.
Is this as drastic as I'm making it out to be, where there's such a difference in what they were under one head coach to the other?
I think so, but what I would caution is that 6, 7, 8 games are such a small sample size.
Yeah.
And I also think that there's a real challenge coming into MLS. This is not a dig at Olaf Melberg at all, but there's a real challenge coming into this league in terms of just adapting to, one, the sheer number of teams and approaches that you're going to play, the conditions, and also learning your squad on the fly. So I think Olaf's got a tough job. And so I understand why his first priority was, hey, an issue for St. Louis last year was giving up bad goals. Like, let's stop doing that and then see if we can flip the other way. And right now he's in a position where he just doesn't have access to his full complement of players. And for really any team in MLS, that's difficult. But I'm trying to think back through previous expansion teams and style of play. You could argue that Nashville have made that sort of big transition in terms of style of play from Gary Smith and sort of the way that they played, which was in some ways a little bit like the way St. Louis is looking right now, just in terms of defensive organization and field tilt, to where they are under BJ Callahan, which is much more flowing, possession-based, and has clicked pretty quickly. And I've been very impressed by them. Cincinnati, throw that one out the window because they were just so awful that there was no comparison. Whatever they were going to do was going to change. LAFC, you could maybe even argue, from Bob Bradley to Steve Cherundolo, all that matters is having the ball, playing pretty, combining, moving forward as a group to we're more comfortable controlling games without the ball. So I think transition is natural under different coaches and with different squads. But you're right that from 23 into 24 and now 25, it's a more rapid shift. I wonder what has Olaf told you guys he wants this team to be, that his vision for this team is. That's where I think I need to do some more digging to truly understand what matches and what doesn't match.
Honestly, Olaf seems pretty happy with what they're doing defensively, which isn't surprising, but he's made numerous comments over the past few weeks about needing to have better quality on the ball, being frustrated at the first decision in progression almost being back, not looking to take those chances in progressing the ball consistently up the wings, not looking to move the ball intentionally, but more fall back. And he seems frustrated with the actual quality of players that he has to work with at this moment. He even brought up, unprompted, Indiana Vassilev this past week in a wingback role, kind of alluding to the fact that without Thomas Totland, they don't have that depth. And it's such a key piece that they're relying on to move from the defensive side into the attack.
I can see it.
And so the difference makers for St. Louis are out to an extent. Thomas Totland, I've been arguing that Thomas Totland is the keyest injury of all of them in St. Louis. Even Roman Berkey. Having Berkey out at first, we thought it was going to be a disaster, but Ben Lunt, let's be fair, has done a pretty good job in his stead. It's the wingback role. It's the field tilt from wing to wing, because last week against SKC, we progressed the ball 88% of the time up the left side once Wallem moved over there.
The whole game, dude. The whole game.
It was nothing. And I joked earlier about Kyle Hebert at right wing back, but that is a point of frustration in the fan base as well. It's having to play guys in attacking roles who clearly aren't attacking minded. And
yeah, I see and hear that just from I haven't watched every 90 minutes this year. I just watched the Kansas City game this morning, and one of the points I brought up is like there's no balance, which again makes it really predictable to play against, because you understand you understand where the danger is going to come from. Realistically, if you're Kansas City, you know how to shade, you know which way you want to push the ball, you know who's most likely to just beat it backwards. You know, if you can get numbers up on Conrad Wallem early, he's going to have to play back into those center backs, and then there's no outlet for them. One thing I do notice is if you're going to play with the three and you want to build with the two central midfielders, they're going to have to get around each other a little bit more. Because right now, when you play into that fullback, there's nobody for him to play with other than back. Like, the options are being taken away. Those central midfielders have to get over. Somebody's got to drop in with him, perhaps if it's Celia Pompeu. But when you start doing that, all of a sudden, then you don't have numbers forward. So right now, the math and the spacing is just not quite right. And I hear and see what Olaf is saying in terms of quality. And I think that comes out in what I'm saying about it being ponderous, because the quality comes with pace of play, quick combinations, rhythm, the right pass forward at the right moment, comfort under the ball when pressured, as opposed to just playing the easiest possible pass either side to side or back. And it just doesn't feel to me like St. Louis are particularly comfortable with the ball right now.
You mentioned the central midfielders needing to come back more to help the wingbacks or the fullbacks out. One of the points of conversation after the SKC game was the positioning of Marcel Hartl Clearly one of the best field players for St. Louis City. He does just about everything really well. And it was a clear prioritization to me of the need to do something more quality in central midfield with Edu Leuven out, with Chris Durkin out, to provide some better on the ball quality. And so you bring Marcel Hartl back. Is this a balance that St. Louis is it sustainable to have Marcel Hartl pulled back so deep without being as involved in the attack?
I don't think so. I don't think there's any way that that's where you want Marcel Hartl to be playing the majority of his minutes in 2025. He has too much quality in the final third in terms of scoring for himself and creating for others to accept that he won't be there regularly. Mm-hmm. And just where he's playing right now, it's very hard for him to get forward. First of all, he would have to combine with somebody to do so, or Joe Klaus's hold-up play would have to be better. But even in that sense, to get the numbers forward at the moment they need to, you're looking at a couple moments a game at best. Right now, the way I watched that Kansas City game, he's too often, back to goal, dropping into spaces with the guy in his butt. He has to drop it off. In the rare cases he was able to get turned, he's playing quarterback and playing 500 because he's just chucking it deep.
Yep.
Because there's no path for him to get forward, to combine, to build pace, to run, to arrive, and to arrive where there might be service. So when I think about it, I thought Pompeu had a fine game in terms of hey, you get this guy on the ball, he can beat somebody.
Yes.
But what does it lead to? Whereas if you have Hartl dropping into that space on the left side and you have the fullback coming up and you have João Klaus coming in, all of a sudden you start creating triangles, you start creating opportunities to both play in that space, but then also to switch out of it and to rotate the ball. And or for him to get turned on goal, or to make a run into a dangerous position, or to have a shooting opportunity at the top of the box, or to play the final pass. Right now, it just feels like he's playing very, very low percentage passes because of where he's at, because there's not a ton of support around him. He's your best player. That can't be where he is living for the rest of the year. But again, injuries, it's tough.
Injuries. That's the key. And I don't think there's any plan to keep him in central midfield. It's to me, like I said, it's the prioritization of where you need to have your best player to have the sum of your parts be better than all of your individual players. And it's putting Hartl in that position, which Olaf clearly prioritizes central midfield as a need to be strong in. And so without Edu Leuven, without Chris Durkin, you're looking at guys like Alfredo Morales, Tomas Ostrak, maybe Akil Watts to shore up that position if you're not dropping Hartl back.
But here, let me give you an example just to go side by side with the Crew and with St. Louis, because they're both sort of building out of that 3-2.
Yeah.
Formationally. But when the Crew build out of the 3-2, those center backs step up into spaces to then be options that aren't directly backwards. Those center backs drive forward and take space individually, on the dribble, and unbalance you that way. And then once you've shifted, bang, you can go back to Nagbe or Zawadzki or Shambost or whoever it is, and all of a sudden they can face upfield and either drive forward themselves, find a wing back. There's options being created to move forward. Whereas when I watch the buildup of the 3-2 of St. Louis, and again, I just watched Kansas City, the rest of the games are not fresh in my mind, it is very static. And it's so static that it's very predictable in terms of how you would defend it and where you can put cover shadows to prevent St. Louis from creating momentum and creating a little bit of push going the other way. So that's where it's all of a sudden just bounce it back, bounce it back, bounce it back, bounce it back, play it to the side. And if you're an opponent, you're yeah, Henry Kessler, bounce it to that outside center back. That's a clear pressing trigger for us. We've already got a guy pushed up on Conrad Wallem because that's his only outlet out of here. We've taken away both central midfielders in our pressure. Where's the ball going to go? Boop. Up in the air to João Klaus all by himself with no numbers around him, where you figure you're going to win the second ball.
A lot of the time, the central midfield conversation revolves around how do you progress the ball higher. And I think the default that Olaf has been complaining about is it oftentimes goes back to that wide center back. And that leads into those presses and the triggers for the other team that really doesn't work out well. The center back question is a question for St. Louis right now. The depth, we have the numbers of center backs on our team, but it's the quality on the ball that I think we have been searching for. This last game against SKC might have provided the best insight into what we're going to see for Columbus just based on availability. We're not expecting to have Joachim Nilsson there. He's still dealing with some pain. I didn't mention him earlier, but he's been out this week from training, still having pain, but they haven't really diagnosed him with anything. We're not expecting him to play this weekend. I would say maybe a 10%, 15% chance that he does if that pain subsides. But without him, you still have Henry Kessler. But now you're looking at the big question on St. Louis's mind is, where is Timo Baumgartel? Why isn't the former Schalke player seeing more minutes if you're struggling to have quality on the ball from your center backs? And I don't know if, I mean, there's probably no answer we could come up with on why we're not seeing him. But if you're looking for quality at your wide center backs, I look for Timo Baumgartel because your other options are Josh Yarrow, Michael Wenzel, Kyle Hebert, possibly. This is where we hurt not having Giannis Horn. Giannis Horn has shown himself to be one of the more adept players on the roster at 1v1 defending in the center back role, but also he does take those opportunities to progress the ball up. And so missing that quality in Giannis Horn could be one of those cascade effects. And it's concerning in how we're going to actually progress the ball against Columbus. But before we look at what City can do to actually beat Columbus and start wrapping this up, because I know time is money for you, Andrew, I don't want to take up too much of your time here. What this approach that Olaf is running with 3 center backs, there have been questions now with the ineffectiveness of the attack. Is this a scenario you can see where you're seeing the method to the madness, where you reshape St. Louis into a 3 center back with wing backs? The defensive structure is sound. You're now trying to work on a cohesive attack out of this. Or is it, I mean, 7 matches in isn't a lot of matches. Is there any sense that St. Louis might try to go into a 4-4-2 type of a look?
I feel like he'll stick with it because I think the personnel, when healthy, that's what best fits.
Yep.
I think it would be a difficult transition early on in his tenure to try to just flip flop back and forth, and I think you create confusion and you start to not necessarily erode, but not reinforce some of the relationships and patterns that you're trying to enforce, even if a lot of them are not working. But there's a big difference to your point about having Thomas Totland at right back and having Wallem at left. Like a huge difference. And Horn. And look, I don't know the story with Baumgartel. We'll have to try to figure that one out this week, I guess. But there's all these like stumbling blocks where you start looking at this team and you think, okay, well, how would I most want to get like Toyshirt and Hartle going? And it's like, well, I'd want to have them sort of floating with a little bit of freedom in behind a striker who can hold the ball up and then be a presence in and around the penalty spot. And hey, look at that. You have 3 of those. João Klaus is he's shown that he can.
Yes.
Yep. Simon Becher has, but I don't think you have that consistent killer there. So I just think if you look at the roster, it makes sense. The problem is you start looking at the depth chart and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. But then you don't see the X's through guys for injury. But I wouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater if I was Olaf. At this point, at the very least, you're very hard to beat. And the hope would be that over the course of the season, as pieces come back in, by the way, there's an open DP spot as well. There are open U22 spots, U22 spots. Perhaps you add a little bit more quality and a little more chemistry there as well.
The great thing about the roster construction is you can change it in the summer. So we're on the U22 model now, but that's not to say we can't add a third DP since we bought down Roman Berkey. There's a lot of options that we have to add on, but I do agree with you 100%. And that could be a reason, honestly, when I've looked at Olaf Melberg in the past and his other coaching stops, he has rotated between 4 in the back and 3 center backs. And it could be the explanation of you're trying to instill that system. You don't want to confuse guys and what the responsibilities are going to be as you try and build a positive attack.
I think the other side is you might not have faith in that you have 2 center backs that can defend in the space that they need to defend in.
Yeah.
And if you don't have faith that you have guys that can defend in that way, because a 3-back versus a 2-back system, there's a lot less pressure on those guys individually in the 3 than there is in the 2 to defend. If you don't think they can deal with the spaces that get created in that system, and you don't think you can get width, because if you get width, you're isolated. I understand why Olaf Melberg might look at his group and say, I need to give you 2 partners at center back in order for us not to get abused in the ways that we did last year.
It's hard to question that, seeing what happened with St. Louis defense last season versus this. At least there's that we can take away still. So what is the recipe for success for St. Louis? How can they beat the Columbus Crew? How can they become the first team in 2025 to defeat the Columbus Crew?
I mean, I think it's set pieces for one. Set pieces are going to play a big outsized role, and Columbus have been pretty poor against set pieces, to be honest with you, over the last couple of years, at least in terms of the way that they would want to be. So I think you're looking for set pieces. The other thing is Wallem's got to find a way to get forward. If you're not going to have balance right to left, you've almost got to be shifting into 4 in the back in possession because, look, whoever plays that right back spot, I guess Akil Watts could get forward more than say Hebert would. You're almost shifting into it. So you need Wallum to be around Celio Pompeu and those guys to create imbalances. And I think one of the things is you got to have better hold-up play because you're going to be playing those long balls. So if you're going to be playing the long balls, you got to have good hold-up play and you got to win second balls off of that so that you can then, not through your own build-up play, but through sort of manipulating space by skipping lines, you can get to goal quicker. Because if you can't get to goal quickly, I don't see run-of-play goals coming for this St. Louis team currently.
Good insight. How do you see this one playing out? Don't sugarcoat it because you're talking to the St. Louis audience. How do you think this one's going to play out at Energizer?
I have a hard time believing that the Crew are not, at the very, very least, going to walk out with their perfect record intact. And I would be shocked if they didn't win. I think you're looking at like the possibility of a 0-0, which I'm not rooting for on Sunday Night Soccer.
Yeah.
Or the Crew pulling out some early goals and St. Louis having to decide how much they're going to open themselves up. And if that happens, that could be big time trouble for St. Louis.
I don't usually say where I think the most important part of the match is going to be. Obviously 90, they're all important, but the Crew have really shown on these first 7 games or so that the first 15 minutes can make or break a game. They've scored 11 minutes into Montreal. They allowed 13 minutes into DC. They scored 13 minutes into San Diego, conceded 13 in Chicago. I mean, early things happen in these Crew games, and St. Louis has struggled here recently in a lot of ways, but namely starting off strong and finishing strong. You mentioned that Wallum opportunity early in the SKC game. You finish that. That's an example here where you start to dictate the pace against this Columbus Crew. So
where that defensive structure becomes a benefit rather than a detriment.
Yes, and we did see the few times St. Louis has had a lead, they've been able to keep it, namely because whether you call it a low block, you call it bunkering, they do get more compact. They are defensively sound, and they keep that when they get leads, if they can just manage to get one against the Columbus Crew. One thing I'll look forward to, so we'll have our lineups on Flyover Footy on Sunday, put our projected lineups out. I'm not going to project a whole starting 11, but I will say I expect to see Wallum and Pompeu link up. I expect to see both of them start. Olaf has mentioned not a lot of positives in the attack, but he continues to mention those 2 players in particular. Cedric Toyshirt may be good to go 45 at least as he continues his recovery from his couple of injuries. Toyshirt and Klaus up front. It would not surprise me to see Marcel Hartl still in the central midfield. I want to see him in the attack, but honestly, with the lack of quality in Leuven and Durkin being out, you're down to Hartl, Alfredo Morales, and Tomas Ostrak, like I said. Akil Watts is there, but right wing back is a big question. There's a lot of questions going into St. Louis, a lot more questions than we want to ask. Andrew, any final parting thoughts? And what are you guys working on for Sunday Night Soccer that maybe you can tease?
There's going to be a fun preview, a fun little feature. I'm going to go play mini golf. We can't call it the Masters, right? But we could pretend on this golf weekend with Cedric Toyshirt, with Timo Baumgartel, and with Marcel Hartl. And so we're going to go with their families to Union Station and play a little mini golf and have a nice conversation about what it's like to be with old friends in a new city, new league, new environment, and making your way many thousands of miles from home. So that should be a really fun time. And then, I'm hoping to be at the Luligans March and the tailgate. And I hear some Nordeca folks might show up to that. So as always, I want to see and feel and talk to the people who are making these stadiums what they are. So I'm just excited to see Energizer Park. Excuse me.
There you go.
The first time.
Got to get the corporate sponsors right. No, that's going to be
always
excited to have you in St. Louis for an actual match this time. First of many, hopefully. Excited to see what happens with that mini golf and the Masters, quote unquote, that we know is in your heart and mind. You picked a good crew, the German connection, Toyshirt, Hartl, and Baumgartel. Fantastic guys. Baumgartel will get you talking, I will tell you that. And I look forward to seeing you on Sunday night. Thank you so much for joining us. For Flyover Footy, we look forward to Columbus Crew on Sunday night. Sunday Night Soccer, St. Louis, Columbus. Thank you so much to MLS Season Passes Andrew Wiebe for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the game, and we'll talk to you later.